Hi there, I am Dr. Jessica Parker, and today I am here to talk with you very briefly about alignment. Now, alignment is one of the most common reasons, or lack of alignment rather, is one of the most common reasons a dissertation proposal is not approved. And I find that a lot of students struggle with alignment because it covers basically all chapters of their proposal. It's not just a specific section of the proposal. And because you are writing for such a long time, months or even years working on your proposal, it's easy to forget what you wrote, maybe a few months ago. And so for that reason, when many students submit their proposal to their chair, there are alignment issues. And so today I'm briefly going to go over what alignment is, how to take apart your proposal to assess alignment, and how to address it, how to improve it. So with that said, I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay, let's make this full screen. So what is alignment? So alignment is simply the logical connection of ideas that are presented throughout your doctoral thesis. And like I said a moment ago, lack of alignment is one of the most common reasons why a doctoral thesis proposal is not approved. So before we dive in, I just want to point out the major components of a doctoral thesis proposal that I'm going to address today in terms of alignment. So we have the problem statement, purpose statement, research questions, your literature review, and then your methodology and research design. And you need to make sure that all of these components are clear, simple, correct, and aligned to make sure that your research is doable, valuable, and credible. Let's dive in. We're going to explore just one topic today. And the topic we're going to talk about is school classroom structure, specifically two types: departmentalized and self-contained school classroom structures. And it's the relationship between school classroom structure and student achievement. So this is a very simple alignment table. And one of the first things I do, especially if I receive a complete proposal from a student or a client, is I start plugging in these components. You can see in the left-hand column, the component are the research questions and the purpose statement. I will copy and paste those components from the proposal, and then I'll take notes in this right-hand column. And by doing that, it's easier to pull out and assess the information for alignment, as opposed to sifting through a pretty long document. And so with that said, I copy and pasted the research questions. Research question 1, what is the relationship between self-contained school classroom structure and student achievement among grade 4 students? And then research question 2, ask the exact same thing, but instead of self-contained classroom structure, it's referring to departmentalized school classroom structure. And so what I did here is I underlined the variables, and I put those over here in the right-hand column. And then I put this relationship, I'll just talk about those for now, in red. We're going to talk about why that's in red in just a moment, but just ignore that for the time being. And so right now I want to assess the alignment between the research questions and the purpose statement. So right here I have the purpose statement copy and pasted from the first page of the proposal. And then, like many students, there are often different versions of purpose statements throughout the proposal. Maybe you say the aim of the study, the objective of the study, the main goal of the study. Those are different ways that you talk about the purpose of the study. And unfortunately, when you use word variation, it causes confusion for your reader. And so what I'll normally do is I'll search for all those variations of the purpose statement and put them in this table, so the student can see very clearly how there's different versions of their purpose statement. And then if needed, I'll help them settle on a specific purpose statement so they can make sure it's aligned with the other components. So in this example, I put school classroom structure and student learning. I underlined those as the variables stated in the purpose statement. And then on page 11, this slightly different version of the purpose statement, I also have school classroom structure underlined. But there's two other variables that are mentioned here, which is student engagement and student achievement. So I pulled those over into this list. Now, the red words indicate these are research terms specific to a research design and methodology. And so when we see the word relationship for a quantitative study, that also means correlation. And so that word is very different than the word impact and influence, which are here. Those mean different things based on your research design. Usually the word impact or influence are connected to a cause and effect relationship, which would be an experimental design, whereas the word relationship is a non-experimental design. And so that's why those terms are very important. They need to align with your research design, and they need to be the same across the research questions and the purpose statement. For example, I could have also said correlation here instead of relationship. Those terms are used often synonymously when we're talking about quantitative research designs. And that would be fine too. You just want to keep that term consistent across your research questions and your purpose statement every single time you mention them in your proposal. And then, oops, let me go back. And then the word how, I put that in red just to point out how that does not align. So we have these different terms being used in these very important components of the proposal. And that alone, even if the variables were the same, is something that I would want to address with the client. And you would want to start by settling on what is the correct term, what actually are the variables that you'll focus on, and you'll make sure that your research questions and your purpose statement reflect what decision you make. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Now we have the problem statement key concepts. Because this is a PowerPoint, I didn't throw in an entire problem statement, which can be anywhere from a paragraph to a page or two. But I did go through that problem statement and I highlighted the key concepts that were covered and I pulled them into this table. And so in this student's problem statement, their key concepts were school climate, classroom structure, student engagement, student learning, and student achievement. And then in my notes here, I just say that these concepts are different from the variables presented in the purpose statement and research questions. So again, I'm not changing anything at this point, especially if I'm coaching someone. I have to have a discussion with them to really figure out what are the key concepts and or variables that need to be focused in the problem statement. But if it's you and you're doing a self-assessment, hopefully this will help you see that there are some differences here. There are some issues with alignment between these components, so you can address them before your proposal goes to your chair or your committee. And then we have the purpose statement again. I just threw this here so we could compare it in terms of alignment to the problem statement. In reality, you can do this in one document, so you're not, having the purpose statement section twice. But for this presentation, I just kind of threw it in here on the slide. I also added that there was a third problem purpose statement on page 37, and it uses the word effect, which again is different than impacts, influences, and the word how. It's also different from relationship. So all of these different variations are confusing for your reader, and your chair will not likely approve your proposal if they see these differences. It requires, knowledge of the research design and methodology that you're going to use. It also requires a very clear understanding of the data that you'll have access to. So in this study, because in hindsight, I now know what happened with this study, there were some issues with the student accessing math scores, which is how they were going to operationalize student achievement. So you also have to think ahead when you're writing your research questions and your purpose statement. Okay. And now we have our literature review headings. So most literature reviews are long. They're 20, 30, 40 pages, and it's easy to get lost in the details. And instead, you really need to zoom out when you're assessing alignment. And I recommend pulling all of the headings, at least the major headings, into an alignment table to make sure that they align with the variables or the key concepts that are central to your study. And just a quick, glance here, what stands out to me is student engagement, because that was not addressed in the research questions or the purpose statement that the student ultimately settled on. And so if I were seeing this as a chair for the first time, I would want to have a conversation with the student to see, is student engagement something they actually want to research? If not, we will probably take it out of the literature review. And part of the reason why this is so challenging is because when you're reading literature, you're not able to isolate variables in single studies. So for example, let's say for this student, many of the articles that they read on student achievement, which is a variable in their study, also discussed student engagement. While they may be related, which is recognized in the literature, that does not mean the focus of your study is student engagement. So therefore, it's confusing when you include that as a major heading in your literature review. Those major headings in your literature review, which are typically APA level 1 or 2 headings, need to be aligned with the key concepts and or variables in your study. And now finally, research design and methods. Let's just say, imagine for a moment that this student, while they said in their purpose statement, let's go back to that, the purpose of this quantitative non-experimental correlational study. They also clearly said the word relationship in their research questions. So if that is the focus of the study, if the student truly wants to do a non-experimental study and they're assessing correlation, then that should be reflected in the research design and methods chapter. And so this student in their methods chapter started out by saying they were doing secondary data analysis of state math scores, and then they wanted to follow up with interviews from teachers. So they said they were doing a mixed method study. And now when you put it into a table, it makes it very obvious what the issue is. But imagine a student who's writing their methods chapter and it's been a year since they've written their introductory chapter. Maybe their decisions have changed. They've decided to go in the direction of mixed methods, but they forgot to go and update instances in their chapter 1 where they stated the research design. And so going back and reviewing earlier sections of your proposal that you wrote months or even years ago is incredibly important to make sure that your new ideas are aligned with what you've already written. And then here, let's just say, for example, the sample, I couldn't include all components of a methods chapter. We have grade 4 students across 2 schools in Pennsylvania and their teachers. And so if this student did decide to move forward with mixed methods, then there would be alignment there between the stated mixed methods. But if the student ends up going with the correlational study where they're just focusing on the students, then you would need to have a conversation about the sample as well. And so you can just see here where I would put my notes in. And this is what it would look like if someone from my team were to evaluate your proposal. You, of course, don't have to have the notes column. You can structure this however you'd like, but I highly recommend building a table where you have the various components. You copy and paste the excerpts from your study, and then you take notes in the margins so you can compare the differences. And then hopefully that'll initiate a process where you make some decisions, and then you make the necessary changes to reflect those decisions. So with that said, thank you for this brief presentation on alignment. I hope you found it helpful.